all had a lovely break over lunch and a chance to talk with people, and haven't we been so blessed with this beautiful weather that we've just been able to go and sit out and have our lunch outside, which has been absolutely delightful. Before I introduce Simon, which is what I'm about to do, I just wanted to say plug a couple of other things. Andrew, who read to us beforehand, has been a friend of mine for many years, actually. I've known him about 14 years. And this book, you should have all had one on your chairs as a freebie for being a delegate here today. If you haven't, I had a rumour that a couple of people haven't had them. So if you haven't, shoot your hand up in the air. No, you're okay. There are more copies for sale. This was a book that Andrew had brought out many years ago, 10 years ago, and had actually gone out of print, and he's very kindly had it reprinted with the bits forward and afterward about the Quiet Garden of 30 years. So that's a little special touch to it. I'm very grateful because Andrew's done all that for us, and he's only charged us cost price, so any extra on that is going towards the Quiet Garden movement. And Andrew's other book that he read out of, which is from the local wood, which I know as Hobbywood, and it is colloquially known in some ways as Hobbywood or Hob Hay. And we've got copies of that for sale too at the back there, so do take a look afterwards. There'll be a chance afterwards to look. And then Annie, do you want to put your hand in there, Annie, so we can also, here's Annie, and this is Annie's book, Back to the Garden and Beyond. She's had these for sale, there's 2 left here, but if you'd like to, Annie's in the middle of the front row here, if you've had a look at it and would like to get more, and again, all the proceeds of that go to the Quiet Garden, come and have a chat with Annie, you can send away for more. So now I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. You've had bios for the 2 speakers, so I'm not going to repeat everything that it tells you about Simon. Oh, yes, a book plug first. Wanting to know more about Simon so I could introduce him, I had a look at his website and I saw this gospel, Humans of Love, which I'd read about and heard about. And I got a copy, and I've just been reading it solidly for a few days. It's an imaginative retelling of the life of Jesus. Is that what you would say? And I was gripped, and it's not as if I don't know the ending, but I was it was just a wonderful read. So I fully recommend that. And yes, Simon, you were an Anglican priest for 20 years. Then you stacked supermarket shelves for 3 years. There's things online to read and hear all about these if you want to know more, if he doesn't mention it today. But in both those cases, you said you knew the adventure had finished and it's time to move on. You used that phrase, the adventure had finished, it was time to move on. And that speaks to me as somebody who can hear that inner voice very clearly. And so this afternoon, you're coming to talk to us about solitude. And to quote yourself on one of your things I watched on YouTube, solitude is the path to inner silence, a pathway we step onto and walk for ourselves. So let's welcome Simon as he comes to speak.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I know everything's been lowered in Brian's book. It's been Sarah kept telling me how she's lowered everything. I said, don't go on about it, Sarah. I heard you the first time. But I hope you can hear me. And please raise your hand if you can't. Well, that's the famous story of the person when the speaker says, "Can you hear me at the back?" And the person at the back says, "Yes, I can hear you, but I'm happy to change places to someone who can't." Please, if you can't hear me, please do raise your hand. I do feel, I mean, it's a huge honour. I'm very, very grateful to Sarah for inviting me to, golly, what an assembly of people, what an assembly of heroes and saints, hopefully not martyrs. But it is a huge honour, and I feel in some sort of trepidation really. Obviously, I'm also made worse by that. I feel like I'm sitting on the shoulders of giants after this morning, listening to Brian with his talk, to Philip with his guided meditation, and also with Andrew's poems. In fact, my wife has already bought his book called Hay and has shown me a poem very excitedly already, so it's happening. But thank you very much to Brian. I mean, I'm very aware I don't have his lovely words or his lovely ability to speak words, and I don't have his lovely music either. So it's all going to be fairly dull. No music at all. But I am very grateful. I'm very conscious of sitting on the shoulders of giants. And when you're my height, that's always good news. So it's, the other thing I would just like to say is that days like this don't just happen. Sarah and many others, of course, have made this happen. I'm very grateful. And to Sharon, who oversaw the cooking of lunch. Sharon. I said it's like MasterChef, but when I say like MasterChef, I don't mean like in the early rounds. It's all a bit rubbish. You know, I'm talking about the semi-finals. You know, it was really very lovely. I'm very grateful. I discovered that Sharon ran a restaurant in Cornwall, and then that all made sense for what we ate for lunch. But working 100 hours a week. Oh my word, gosh. Anyway, thank you very much. It's much appreciated. And so we're going to think about solitude. And I'm aware this is the graveyard sloth. We have a graveyard outside. This is the graveyard sloth after lunch. So I'll try and talk loudly, talk very fast indeed, and not take too long. But we are going to think about solitude. I was forced to sort of focus on solitude quite recently. I wrote a book before the one that was mentioned, Gospel. I wrote a novel about the life of Julian of Norwich, of course, who didn't have a quiet garden, but she had a quiet cell. She was sealed in, and we don't quite know how long she lived there. I think she lived there for about 40 years. But there's a step into solitude, because what was interesting about her cell was that it had 3 windows, as you will know. She was sealed in, she was bricked in, her life was bricked in, but she had 3 windows. One of the windows was into the cathedral, to Norwich Cathedral, through which she could receive the Mass. One of the windows was that the food came through there and the waste went out there, because the 3rd window was for people to come and see her. And so people did come and see her. Some people left her legacies, not as many as I think she hoped, probably. Pretty cool dream. But the 3rd window was for people to come and see her. So although she closed herself off into solitude, she was still available for other people to come and see her, which I think is a nice picture of solitude, because actually solitude obviously doesn't close us down. It opens us up. And obviously you are wonderful providers of solitude to people. And the strange thing is, you're not closing them down, you're opening them up by inviting them to be with themselves. So we're going to be thinking about solitude. And I suppose, I've always had a very positive picture of solitude. So when I started to write the book, I wrote a book called Solitude, Recovering the Power of Alone. When I wrote it, it was about 10 years ago, I was thinking, well, this is a nice thing to be writing about. But what I discovered was, it doesn't actually have a very good press, solitude. I mean, we all might, I don't know, perhaps this is not maybe a good cross-section of the country. Most of us will probably be thinking, solitude, that's a nice idea. That's good, isn't it? But it doesn't have a good, when the first line in Wikipedia, when I looked at it, I don't know if it's the same, but it puts you in the picture. The first line in Wikipedia on the subject of solitude says, solitude may stem from bad relationships, infectious diseases, mental disorders, neurological disorders, or circumstances or situation, see castaway. So beware, the person sitting next to you is probably either sort of socially awkward, ravaged by disease, mentally disturbed, or thinks they're Robinson Crusoe. It's a very, and I think the negative picture is quite widespread. So when I wrote the book, and I would eagerly tell people what I was doing. And I thought it'd be a good news story. I expected excitement. Oh, Simon, that's really good. Oh, everyone will really want to read that. Solitude, great. But obviously, from the reaction, it was more like I was writing a book about the pros and cons of leprosy. It was just not, it just didn't appeal in that way you sort of hope it will. And I think one of the problems, of course, with solitude is that people equate it with loneliness. And that's very common. And obviously, you hear it in reactions like, someone might say to me, 20 years on my own, Simon, I've had quite enough solitude, I think. No, my friend. No, you've had quite enough loneliness. The two are very different. And they feel very different. If you'd had 20 years of solitude, you'd have quite a different spirit beside you. Probably a more happy one. Because obviously loneliness is being unhappily alone, while solitude is being happily alone. And loneliness feels harsh, and we all will have known it. It feels like a punishment. When loneliness comes, it feels like a punishment. We're being punished. While solitude feels like a gift. And it's a sort of a path to stillness, into awareness, into understanding, into refreshment, and to identity. So loneliness feels like it's done to us. It cuts us off from people, because then as soon as we're lonely, we probably go into quite a depressed or judgmental mode. Loneliness turns us against ourselves and against other people. Whereas solitude is a choice, and it tends to open us up to the world. When it's working well, it opens us up to the world. So for me, solitude, it's an active word. It's it's the active path, as we're just hearing, to inner stillness or silence. It's like a walk through the woods towards a clearing. Solitude is a walk through the woods to a clearing, and it's in this clearing that Meister Eckhart would call that the emptiness. We arrive through the tangled web of emotions and thoughts. We keep walking, and we arrive at this clearing, and in that clearing is probably what Meister Eckhart would call the emptiness that God must fill. We're walking through the wood, tangled emotions, thoughts, so many thoughts. We reach a clearing of calm and the numinous, and it's a sort of emptiness because there's nothing there. And I immediately think, oh my goodness, there is nothing here. And that is the emptiness that Meister Eckhart celebrates. People don't really celebrate emptiness these days so much. And he would say that's the emptiness that God must fill. And of course, you see it. You see it in that Old Testament story. In the Old Testament, if God was there, it was probably loud. Whatever it was noisy. Then we had this strange story. They said, no, the Lord said, go and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And you have to be in a silent place to hear that. Because if everything's noisy, it's very difficult to hear a gentle whisper. So solitude is not an end in itself. It's a path towards something. It's a path towards inner stillness and silence, towards emptiness, which has a lovely sort of positive framing from Meister Eckhart. It's a place of receptivity. And that's, that often isn't our space. That's often not where we are. But solitude is this active walk towards this space, this emptiness, this receptivity. So in solitude, we set off towards stillness and silence. And sometimes we make it, and sometimes we don't. And that's fine. Fail again, fail better. The foliage that we struggle through, sometimes the foliage is so thick, the emotions so powerful, the thoughts so impenetrable, we don't make it there. We fail. So we may not always make it to the clearing. But it's probably worth it. It's worth keeping going. You know the story, it's a famous story that Carl Jung told about the priest who came to him and said that he felt his ministry was lacking sort of energy these days. What the exact phrase was? It was lacking. His ministry it just didn't feel quite as powerful as it used to be. And so Jung recommended that he went and spent one evening a week by himself. So he came back the next week and Jung said to him, well, how did it go? Did you do that? He said, yeah, I did that, yeah. I spent the evening by myself, I watched TV, enjoyed it very much. And Jung said, yeah, but don't watch TV, just spend the evening with yourself. So he goes away, he comes back next week, and Jung says to him, well, how did it go? Did he get in the evening by himself? He said, yep, it went very well indeed. I read a book, enjoyed it very much indeed. And Jung said, no, I didn't say read a book. I said, just be with yourself. And the priest said to him, but I can't do that. I wouldn't want to be with myself. And Jung said to me, yeah, but see, if you don't want to be with yourself, will anyone else? Really? Because if you're running from yourself, you're running from something that's difficult, it's unresolved, and yet somehow you're expecting everybody else to think you're wonderful. It's not really going to work. And of course, if we don't like ourselves very much, and I think this is a huge issue around solitude for many of us, if I don't like myself, why would I desire solitude? Why would I want to be with someone I don't like very much? We'll want to keep away from that. Some people like to be with other people, not because they like the other people, but it's just so they avoid their own company wherever possible. So people obviously set themselves a community agenda because it's easier being with other people, even if I don't like them very much, than being with myself. So when we talk, in glowing terms about solitude, we're just realizing right at the beginning that there are issues inside us that make solitude difficult. And if I don't like myself, that is an issue. So, if we fear silence, for whatever reason, why would we desire solitude? And silence is a big issue for a lot of people. Now, it was in an early interview, and I don't know if it's changed now. I hope for Colleen's sake that it has changed. But Wayne Rooney, the famous footballer, when he was a younger player, he had to go to sleep with a Hoover on. The Hoover had to be on. There had to be that noise because the silence was too threatening. And a good friend of mine has to go to sleep with a TV on. These things are not unusual. But for him, the silence is too threatening because I know what my friend will do. My friend will just turn in on himself. And so better to have the TV on and sort of drown it all out and get to sleep. So, people who seek disturbance, because they fear that silent clearing. If we're saying to someone, isn't it lovely? You go through the woods and you reach a clearing. Not everyone is thinking that's lovely because that feels quite threatening. But if we can just hold the fear of why we find it difficult to be with ourselves, if we can just hold and allow that fear, because it's quite reasonable, we do actually notice we can make some progress because we can say, oh, hello, fear. I can see, hello, fear, you've come along again. And I can see you're saying, oh, don't be in silence, you might meet yourself. I can understand that fear. I know where it comes from. I've learned a bit about my past, some of the past influences on me. I understand the fear, but I don't have to believe you anymore. So actually, I'm going to step through you into silence and see what happens. And I think one of the things that happens when we're able to step through our initial fear into silence, into solitude, is that we begin to discover a much truer identity. Ted Hughes, the poet, Ted Hughes wrote, and you may know it's a very famous letter to his son, who was troubled, I think, on his 24th birthday. His son went on to kill himself, I think, in his 30s. But he wrote a letter to him when he was 24, and he talked to him about how difficult it is in the world when you only meet the secondary self of someone. He said, if you only meet someone's secondary self, it's a very bleak experience. Of course, but everyone, that's tend to be what everyone offers you, their secondary self. Their primary self, their truer self, is hidden away. And I like, you know, whatever we call it, true self or false self or primary self or secondary self. Julian of Norwich, he called it substantial self and insubstantial self. And if we're just dealing with the insubstantial self, with that secondary self, which we usually are, it's quite unsatisfying. And so I think one of the purposes of going into the silence, into that emptiness, is actually to discover a truer identity, a primary self. So that isn't the identity that the world gives us, which is a rather changeable and random thing, but it's a true identity. It's the life beneath our life. You know, I don't want to be defined. I don't want to. I love walking through graveyards. Brian was asking us this morning, you know, what fed our soul, what brought our soul alive? You know, I love walking through graveyards because they remind me I'm alive. And they remind me of all the things to grasp and seize before I join them, which I will. And one of the things to grasp and seize is a sense of my own identity. Who am I? You know, I don't want to be defined by success because I hardly ever have it. So that's going to be a bad move. You know, successful very occasionally, but mostly not. So if my identity is tied up with that, I'm in a pickle. And I don't need to be tied up with relationships either, because sometimes people like me, sometimes people don't. So this is not a wise source of definition, self-definition. You know, relationships are granted and they're withdrawn. I don't always know why. And sometimes they're beautiful and sometimes they're poison. But they're certainly not a secure identity in which to, as a foundation to build my identity. So, you know, circumstances, relationships, these are where a lot of identities are formed. But of course, it's going to be a painful life because my identity is going to really come in for a battering. Because it's such a fragile little thing. You know, I would actually like my identity to be formed by something profounder than that, primary self, the life beneath the life, you know, our true originality, which we knew before we were born and which we will know after we die, but which we can lose sight of in life. And I think in solitude, if we risk stepping through that fear into the nothingness, into the emptiness, I think we also risk finding ourselves, finding something much truer. And I think it's so often I see people amazed at who they are and what is in them. It comes and goes, we find it, we lose it, but it's there. And solitude is the path, you know, to that true identity, the life beneath our life. I mean, even if we pause now, can you sense it now? Can you sense in you something that just exists beneath, you know, all the label, all the roles that you play in life? How do people know you? What roles do you play? But then beneath the roles that you play, is there a life beneath the life? Maybe only you know it. And if there was a word to describe that life in you, does one word come to mind? That truer life. I don't know how to pronounce the name. I think it's Isaac Dynasson, but it could be Dynasson. But she tells a story of her time in Africa. And one day she was out in the bush and she saw a snake of great beauty with a glistening skin full of wonderful colours. And she was in awe of what she'd seen. And she spoke a little else on her return home. And everyone listened to her and they could see that she was really in awe of this beautiful, amazing snake. And so the house servant went out into the bush and killed the snake and skinned it and made it as a belt for Isaac, obviously expecting Isaac to be hugely pleased. So she now had a snakeskin belt. But obviously, for Isaac, there was no beauty there because the vibrant skin had become dull and grey, because its beauty hadn't been in the skin, but in its life, the life beneath the skin, in its livingness. It was this life that transformed and permeated the skin. And for me, that's a story about our identity. You know, our identity is not what we do or the reputation that we have or the name that we have, but it's in the life beneath that life. You know, I like our postman. I genuinely like our postman, but not because he's a postman, although that's the only way I know him. He turns up with letters. He is a postman, and that's how I know him. But I like him because of the life beneath his postman role, which just comes through. It comes through. I know there's another life underneath that. And it's a nice life, it's a good life. And that's his identity, not his role, but postman. His true identity is beneath that. And I remember when I worked in the supermarket, we had the area manager coming around to do an inspection. Everything very tense in the supermarket. The area manager is coming around. We all had to have our name labels, and I'd lost mine. Mine said Simon, obviously, and I'd lost it. And so he said, "Well, find another name." I said, "Well," he gave me a box of names. And he wouldn't let me choose Wendy. So it had to be for his name. And so I chose Omar. And for the next 6 months at least, I was Omar. People called me Omar. They come in the shop and they're actually talking to Omar. And it just struck me. I mean, I was about 50 at the time. It just struck me how it's fine. It's just a name. You know, there's a life beneath the name. And I was very, very happy. I was surprised how quickly I could just jettison my name and become Omar for those who I needed to be Omar. Because we're not defined by our name, but we're defined by the life beneath our name. And so for me, solitude is stepping into that space through the anxiety, lots of anxiety around. So much anxiety around. Through the fear, through the anxiety, through the rage, there's a lot of stubborn, aggressive anger around. Stepping through those things, through those emotions, through the thoughts, towards a clearing of space and stillness, which of course is what you are providing for people. And for me, you know, Philip used the word nudge. And that's a lovely word. We're nudging people towards a truer identity. You know, when I die, 5 minutes before I die, if I'm given that honor to be able to know what's coming, I don't want to look back on a life defined by circumstances or defined by others. I don't want to look back on a life defined by my parents or by the church. Or by the fractures that were put in me when I was young. I don't really want to look back and think of my life as defined by these fractures or these particular circumstances, you know, whether it's a mosque or temple or church or whether it's the media. No, I want to look back on a life with a more original definition. I'd like to look back on a life that knew who it was and was secure in who it was. And I think there's no way for that discovery apart from through solitude. You know, so I think in solitude we're looking to exchange tact for gold, and we're looking to exchange confusion for identity. Lovely, so lovely when we come home to something that's true about ourselves. Maybe one word came to your mind when you were thinking earlier. When we come home to a single word as opposed to just a morass of confusion. We exchange busy for still. That's a very difficult step to make. That's a very difficult step to make, from busy to still. And we exchange fear for discovery. You know, we don't imagine being in a room in silence without a Hoover on. Imagine that. But that's a big fear for some of us to step through. And I think, solitude obviously invites us from being a machine to being human. Because when we're in secondary self, what Ted Hughes called our secondary self, the one we offer to the world most of the time, and may even be offering to ourselves, we're pretty predictable. We're just a series of compulsive patterns. Our behavior is compulsive. There's no freedom there. Sometimes it's nice, sometimes it isn't. But basically, we're on a treadmill of compulsive reactions to things. That's the secondary self. But the idea of a primary self, something beneath that life, and solitude is the place where that might become apparent. Now, I'm also aware there are two large elephants in the room, and one of the elephants in the room is this. Here we are considering solitude in a group. It does sound odd. I know a friend of mine went to a house party in Wales quite a long time ago, but he went to a house party in Wales, and I think after about 3 days of the house party, he felt he needed a break. And it was one evening, and he said, okay, guys, I need to be alone, just go out for a walk. So we got up to go out for a walk, and another person there said, yeah, I need to be alone as well, I'll come with you. And the idea, reflect on solitude in a group. I don't think is odd at all. I think I think it's very important actually that we're able to hold on to solitude both in a group and by ourselves. I think that's quite important. That you can know a level of solitude even as you sit there now. That in a way you can be here with yourself. I'm here as well. I'm talking. But actually you are where you are, and you're also with yourself. And I'm part of the story, but actually another part of the story is where you are now in yourself. And we're sort of having a conversation. I'm having a conversation with that sort of deeper self. And I think it's very important that we can in a crowd, that we're able to withdraw. Mother Secletica was an abbess in the deserts in Middle Egypt in the 4th century. And she was suspicious. Obviously, it was a rush to be hermits then. Everyone wanted to be hermits. Now everyone wants to go into marketing. But in those days, everybody wants to go into being hermit. But she was suspicious of the whole hermit thing. So the desert one-upmanship, which you can get, as we all know, if we lived for 40 years in the desert. You have one person saying, I live 40 miles from the nearest living soul. And so the person next to him says, well, really, Gavin? Well, I live 80 miles from the nearest living plant. And you get into this, I'm much more in solitude than you are. So you get into some desert one-upmanship around how far you live away from people. But Mother Secletica, bless her, in her wisdom, knew that not all hermits were true hermits. They might live miles from anyone in a cave, but their minds are so busy, they might as well be in the amphitheatre in Rome. So yeah, they're miles away from anyone, but their minds, they're so busy. And so we all know this. We can take ourselves off on a day retreat, but our mind is so full of people, incidents, anger, anxiety, whatever, we might as well be stood in Piccadilly Circus. Because that's not solitude. But it might become solitude. We might have to actually get through that compulsive behaviour. Just allow it, speak with it, notice it, don't judge it, but just let it go because it has no place now. To get beyond it. And then we step into solitude. But it's certainly, I think the idea of actually knowing solitude in a crowd is very important for us. Otherwise, we're very vulnerable. We can just get carried away by whatever's happening around us. And that makes us very vulnerable because very often not good things are happening around us. Mother Secletica was very keen on people being solitary, both alone sometimes, but also solitary in a crowd, in a marketplace. I went for an interview. My long list. I went for an interview quite a long time ago now for a job, and I was being interviewed by two. It was quite a sort of. It was in quite a high-powered setting. This job, and it was apparent the two people interviewing me were actually, funny enough, they were aware of my book Solitude. I don't know how they were, but they were, and and so I hope this might help me because I need all the help I can get in any interview. And but it actually seemed to present them with problems because one of them said to me, "Well, there's not much chance of solitude here," he said. "It's much too busy." He smiled on his face. And the other one agreed. Interestingly, he was a bishop. He said, "It's all about performance from the start of the day to the end of the day," he said, fingering his large cross. It's all about performance from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. He says, "Believe me, this is not a place for solitude, Simon." And I, forgive me, Lord, I just felt angry. I just felt angry. So I said to them, I said, "Well, you don't need to be alone to experience solitude. I'm sitting here talking to you now, but on another level, I'm sitting here aware of my inner silence, the free space within me. So I'm with you, and I'm not with you." They're just quizzical. They're just quizzical looks from both of them. And the bishop sort of fondled his cross in irritated fashion. And I was aware that they didn't understand, aware I was creeping off traditional interview territory. But I didn't want to give any nourishment to their dull and self-important activism. As if you have to be busy performing from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, and what they regard as performing is just living out from your secondary reactive self. That's performance. Well, I didn't want to nourish. I didn't really want to nourish that. It was a chaplain's job, actually. I didn't get it. But amid the disappointment, and amidst my anger, I was angry. I think was the thought probably Jesus wouldn't have got it either, because I think he would have been shortlisted, but I don't think he really had it in him to do it, probably. Because obviously we do know from the Gospels that Jesus disappeared off early sometimes into the morning, didn't he? And there is that very funny, I think it's one of the great comic scenes in the Gospels where he's crept off early, hasn't gone up to his cave, down the cave, and then, who turns up? Peter turns up, he finds him, and he's saying, "No, we didn't know where you are. Where were you? We've been looking for you, we didn't know where you were at all." And you can just hear Jesus saying, "No, I know. I'm so glad you didn't know where I was." Probably something ruder. And of course, that's all of us all the time. We may not be at a job interview, we may not be the Messiah, but we're out there playing roles in society, and some of them are very demanding ones. My goodness, if we sat down and listed the roles that have been played by this gathering of heroes, it would be remarkable. It would actually be really uplifting, I think, but it would be remarkable, the roles that are played by you. And often very demanding ones. But I suppose it's whatever we're doing, we're also trying to stay in touch with our livingness, with ourselves, with who we are, with our inner flame, with our inner space. Because it's easy to forget. And then we just get caught up in our roles. And then we become angry and irritated and stressed. Because roles are stressful. Of course they are. And that's when we lose touch. When we lose touch with who we are, we become stressed. And when we run away from the solitude we become posturing puppets on twisted strings of our own self-importance and neediness. You know, I need you to do this for me. So many people playing roles step into that neediness space, or just irritated or anxious. How do we stay? How do we keep our roles living, like with the snake? Those beautiful colours through the skin, but it's not about the skin. It's about the life beneath it. And I suppose for me, solitude and what you create for people is about helping people find that space. They're nudged towards something truer, which is beneath the role that they play. You know, we shouldn't expect people to be in touch with who they are. It's quite unusual. It's quite unusual. I mean, you know, if you wish to parody society today, you know, it's very obvious, isn't it, that, you know, we've got Facebook, we've got LinkedIn, we've got mobiles, we've got iPads, we've got 24-hour media, we've got Instagram, we've got WhatsApp, we've got Zoom, we've got Microsoft Teams. We are in touch with everyone and everything, you know, except ourselves, because that's a great deal more difficult, obviously. And people who lose contact with themselves are dangerous. You know, if you appoint a person to a role and they're not in touch with themselves, it's quite dangerous, because who knows what's going to come out. So we practice solitude both alone and in the company of others. We need to do it alone, I think, because it's easier. It's easier if we can get through that fear of self-judgment, self-blame. If we can get through the anxiety, those fears, if we can get through those things, we can be in solitude alone, but also learn to be in solitude in a crowd, in a group. So we stay with who we are. We don't become a doormat. It's possible to be solitary in one's mind while living in a crowd, said Mother Sikletica. And of course, another apparent irony, of course, with the book is that it's a conversation. It's written as a conversation. The whole book is written as a conversation, it's a dialogue. It started to be a conversation about the third draft. By the fourth draft, it was an entire conversation. And it was still an entire conversation in the eighth draft. But we begin to notice, I think it is a conversation inside us, because we begin to notice some of the dominant voices inside our heads. And we've all got a little cast of characters inside us who all have a different agenda. But some of those voices might be more powerful than others. And we begin to hear how these voices affect our relationship with solitude. So even as you listen to this talk, there are different voices inside your head reacting. You know, perhaps the contemplative voice, you know, is enjoying it, but the busy voice isn't. Oh, for goodness sake. Or perhaps the frightened voice is screaming. Go away. Or as my a relation of mine says when she doesn't want to listen to what you're saying, shit. And that is very, you know, you can understand if you don't want to hear something. We have some very powerful voices inside us. But the book is a conversation because we are. And, you know, so, you know, which voices are going on in your head now? Got a lovely cast of characters there. You know, perhaps it's a controlling voice. You know, why doesn't he just cheer up a bit? You know, oh, for goodness sake, just cheer up a bit. Or the curious voice. Oh, is there something there? Interesting, I'm not sure. Could be. Or the voice of low self-worth. Well, it's all very well, but I prefer noise. Turn on the Hoover. You know, that low self-worth voice that just doesn't want to be with itself. No. This is uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable. Let's have some noise, please. Turn on the telly. Or, as I said, it could be the bored voice. It just needs distraction always. Oh, let's have some distraction. Let's have some distraction. I've had enough of this. Okay, enough. Let's have some distraction. Or it could be the confident voice, you know, sounds like home. This sounds like home. So there are different voices inside us. We begin to listen to the dominant voices. You know, if there was a dominant voice inside you, which voice would be keeping you from solitude? Which voice would it be? Which would make it most difficult for you to experience solitude? Because various voices can do that. But for you, which would it be? You know, I spend most of my time in life in therapeutic relationships with people. We're just creating space for people to listen to the different voices inside their heads. Because the remarkable thing is that most people think there's only one voice. Have never stopped to think that there could be 17 different voices. They imagine they are moving through the world in some reasonable manner, guided by one clear voice. Little do they know. But how refreshing to discover, oh, there are different voices, and actually they've all got different agendas, and they're pulling in different directions. And some of those voices are really healthy, and some aren't. And that's such a lovely discovery to make. Just doing some editing here. That's we're at the time. Yeah, I believe that. But we're thinking about solitude and the quality of our solitude. Because solitude is not a place, but it's a quality. And one way to test our solitude is to reflect on the nature of our silence, because no two silences are the same. No two silences are the same. You know, it's not long before we're going to be choosing our mince pies. It's not that far away. I think we're allowed to do that beginning of December. It's not so far away. And the question is, which mince pies will you choose? Now, I ask because they're not all the same. You know, like solitude, mince pies are sort of a continuum of quality. They're all mince pies. They're all mince pies, but they're not all equally good. And interestingly, last year, Waitrose and Griggs came top equal. The difference was that you didn't have to sell your house to buy the Griggs pies. But you know, in the same way, silence is not all the same. You know, if I'm sulking, that's not solitude. Because if I'm sulking, I'll probably be full of self-pity and I'll probably be judging someone as well. But it could become solitude if I can actually just listen to my sulking and say, oh, hello, sulking. Thank you for coming. As the Swedish say, thank you for going. So if I can get through my sulk, it could become solitude. Or, you know, the person who likes to be alone because they find other people so bloody irritating. Well, that's not solitude. That isn't solitude. Because actually that's just full of judgment and avoidance and escapism. It's not digging at anything. It's closing down on everything. So that isn't solitude. But it could become solitude if I notice these things in me and say hello to them, speak with them, and then let them pass. Then I'd be stepping into the clearing, which would be rather exciting. And of course, you know, you may have learned from way back to fear silence. Some silence is very damaging. Not all silence is the same. You know, think of people who lived in homes where rage and fury were never expressed, but lived there like congealed sick in the silence. And there's where repressed anger and rage sit in silence. That's Akira. And if we knew that when we were small, it's not surprising that we don't like the idea of silence. fill that space with anything. Too many difficult memories. So we're thinking about the quality of silence and how we notice that we might be trying for solitude, but we're struggling to get there because issues are arising. There are voices inside our heads. There are feelings. There are fears. And so it's like we're trying to get through the foliage of a jungle to this clearing, but it's difficult. And it could be difficult in a beautiful space like this. We could be set in the most beautiful space and still struggle because of what's going on inside us. So we must never punish ourselves for finding it difficult. Never punish ourselves. The path to solitude is never self-judgment. It's always, as we were hearing today, loving kindness towards ourselves. Because if there's a problem, we can be sure we did not put it there. If I fear silence, I didn't put that problem in me. If I'm anxious, I didn't put that problem in me. Someone else did. So we do need to be very kind to ourselves, because probably all of us would like to reach that solitude, that creative space, that lovely emptiness, that receptivity. But my goodness me, in this flesh and bone body of mine, how difficult it is, how many different voices there are. There's some foliage to be worked through. And so maybe we'll just end by just thinking, what in your life creates solitude and what in your life kills it? Or who in your life? Who in your life helps you with solitude and who in your life makes it very difficult? What are the inner voices that help you towards solitude? What are the inner voices that make it difficult? You know, maybe that you have a friend who actually calms the panic inside. That somehow, when you're with them, they manage to calm the panic and you arrive at a peaceful place. Not even sure how it happens, but it does. Whereas you might have another friend who's always ringing you up to go out because they just keep, they're afraid of solitude. They're afraid of silence. They're driven by fear. Hey, let's go do this. Let's go do this. And, you might not particularly want to. But you do, because they want to. So it's good to, I think, it's good to consider occasionally the influence people have on us. Because when you light, if you think about solitude as a lighted candle, so many things make a difference. The lighting, you need to have dry matches, you need to have a good wick, lovely wax, no wind, good conditions for flame, for a candle. But it's dependent on different things. It's dependent on the spark of the light, fire, the wick, the wax, the conditions around. And so for you, you are that candle. Sometimes it's very difficult. What conditions make solitude possible for you? And what conditions are against it? And maybe the most important word for solitude, finding solitude, maybe the most important word is no. Because it's generally, if I'm in a doctor's surgery, when doctors used to have surgeries, before they work from home, there'd be some rubbish magazines. I would read, well, actually I can't say this now because of the Conservative MP, but I used to read things like Tractors Weekly, and things like that, just because it's there. Whereas I could actually just sit and be. I could just say no. Or, in the shop, we managed to persuade the manager, he hated the idea of 2 minutes of silence on Remembrance Day, 11th of November. We said we'd like to stop the shop for 2 minutes. He hated the idea, 2 minutes less business. But he allowed it in the end. And so we stopped the shop, we made everyone stand wherever they were, in the aisles. And the thing is, the first minute was really tense, and you could see people you know, when they were there with their, when they were there with their phones, they were sort of reaching for their phones to make sure they're still alive. Doing this a bit, or looking at the coal store and looking at the back for a better date. They knew they had to be quiet, but they could still get on with things, like their phone or the coal store. They could still get on with things, you know, I've got to be quiet, but I can still get on with things. And then in the second minute, actually, it was palpable. In the second minute, people began, oh, and actually they weren't fiddling with their phones and they weren't looking at the coal store. And actually they have managed to step through the fear and the insecurity into silence. They were able to say no. And I think for me, the no, for many of us, is the best gate. It's the most important gate into solitude. So thank you very much. We've just been thinking about solitude. It does get a bad press. It's full of fears for people, solitude, and very good reasons. Because silence is difficult for people. And also, if people don't like themselves, why would they want to spend time with themselves in silence? So there are some big things to get through, some foliage, thick foliage. Sometimes we make it to the clearing, sometimes we don't. But maybe the goal, the aim, the hope is that when we get into that clearing, we get into that emptiness and that receptivity, and something much more truthful about ourselves can emerge, a true identity, our primary self. You know, the life beneath the life that we live. And I hope we discover that solitude can be found in a crowd. I can stay hold of myself, actually with other people. I don't have to submit to everything that's going on. I can still be me in that crowd, whether it's a job interview or whatever the roles that we play. We've also noticed the different voices inside us that make solitude difficult, whether they're anxious voices or fearful voices or angry voices, voices of low self-worth. You know, you hate yourself. Why do you want to be silent? But I think this thing about solitude is solitude is never separating. We know that we're really there. We know that they're there when we're open. You know, like Julian Norwich in her cell. She was separate, but she was open because there was the window. And I think solitude is always about being open to ourselves, to God, to the world, to people. That is the quality of solitude. And maybe sometimes the gate to it, although it's very, very difficult, maybe the gate to it is that simple word, no. But that is quite long enough. Thank you very much for your kindness.